50 feet. That's how low she was. 50 feet off the deck, in a $35 million attack helicopter, at 60 knots, in a whiteout so complete that she could not see her own rotor disc, could not see the ground that was rushing beneath her at 100 feet per second, could not see anything at all through the canopy except a wall of moving white that had swallowed the entire world. No horizon, no up that you could trust your eyes about, no down, just white, and the green glow of the instruments 6 inches from her face, and the numbers on those instruments, which were the only things in the universe she was permitted to believe, and a voice in her headset, her own gunner, her front seater, a man from Panama named Reyes who had flown with her for 2 years and trusted her with his life, and was, at this exact moment, gripping the edges of his seat hard enough to leave marks. Reyes saying, very quietly, in the voice a man uses when he is trying not to disturb the person doing the impossible thing, Radolt's bouncing. You're at 48, 46, 46 feet, in the mountains, in the dark, in the snow. And Solveig Haarde did not climb. Climbing was safe. Climbing was what every cell in her body and every page of the manual screamed at her to do. Climb, get altitude, get separation from the terrain that was waiting in that white to reach up and take her. But she had a platoon down there. She had a platoon of NATO infantry cut off in a valley she could not see, and 2 of them were bleeding out into the snow, and she had run the only math that mattered, which was that altitude bought her safety and cost them their lives. And so she traded her safety away, deliberately, knowingly, the way you'd hand over your coat to someone freezing, and she held 46 feet, and she said into the intercom, calm as a woman reading a recipe, copy 46. Watch the contour. I've got it. I've got it. Now, I'm going to do something I almost never do, which is stop the engine right there, freeze her at 46 feet in the white, and back the whole thing up, because you cannot understand the size of what she did in that cockpit unless you understand the size of the words she was answering. Because 4 hours before she said I've got it to her gunner at 46 feet, a major had said something else to her, in a warm, dry tent with a coffee urn in the corner, in front of a room full of other pilots. And what the major said was the thing this whole story turns on. So let me take you back to the tent. My name's Hatch. You know how I do this. I find the ones the official record either got wrong or left out, the ones that got told sideways in a bar or a hangar or a VFW parking lot until the truth wore thin, and I sit with them, and I find the people who were actually there, and I put it back the way it happened. And I'll tell you up front, the way I always do, that the records of this particular night are incomplete. Weather logs from a NATO winter exercise on the northern edge of nowhere in 2014 are not a thing a man can just pull up clean. Some of what I've got is from the people who were in that valley. Some of it is from a man who was in the front seat of that Apache and has thought about it nearly every day since. And some of it I've had to reconstruct from the shape of the silence around it, which is its own kind of evidence. So where I'm sure, I'll tell you I'm sure. And where I'm reading the silence, I'll tell you that too. That's the deal. That's always the deal. Her name is Chief Warrant Officer 2 Solveig Haarde, United States Army. AH-64D Apache pilot. That's the attack bird. The one that looks like an insect built by an engineer who hated the enemy. The one with the chain gun under the chin that tracks wherever the gunner's helmet looks. The one that is not, by any stretch of any definition, a rescue aircraft. That matters. Hold on to that. The Apache does not save people. The Apache kills people, or keeps them from being killed by killing the people trying to do it, which is a different thing. It carries no litter. It has no room for a wounded man. Its entire purpose is violence, delivered precisely from the air. Remember that, because the thing she did with it that night was not what it was built for. And that's part of why it was impossible, and that's part of why it worked. Haarde was North Dakota. And if you know anything about North Dakota, and most people know exactly nothing about North Dakota, which is how the people of North Dakota prefer it, you know that it produces a specific kind of human being. Flat country, open country, winters that do not negotiate. Her mother's people were Norwegian, real Norwegian, the kind that came over in the 1800s and settled the Red River Valley because it reminded them of home, which tells you something about both places. And Solveig grew up in a house where the wind in January could push a wall of white across the prairie in under a minute, where the school bus had a protocol for whiteouts, where her father, a man who farmed and flew a little Cessna for spotting and dusting, taught her before she could legally drive that the single most dangerous thing a person can do in a whiteout is trust their eyes. You don't have eyes in a whiteout, he told her. Your eyes will lie to you. Your eyes will tell you the ground is up and the sky is down, and you will fly your truck straight into a fence post going 40 because your eyes swore the road turned. In a whiteout, you have your instruments and you have what you remember about the land. That's it. That's all you get. And if you can't trust those two things absolutely, you should not be out in it. She was, the people who knew her say, the kind of kid who didn't talk much and didn't need to. Watchful, steady, the one who, when the calf got out in a blizzard and everyone else was panicking, was already pulling on her boots with a plan in her head. Not cold. People mistake that kind of steadiness for cold, and it's not cold. It's the opposite. It's a person who has decided that the panicking is the part she'll do later, privately, after the thing is handled, because the panicking doesn't help the calf. She carried that into the army the way some people carry a name. The steadiness was the whole of her. She didn't come up easy. Warrant officer flight training is its own particular crucible. These are the technical experts, the ones who fly the aircraft as a profession and an art rather than as a stepping stone to command. And the washout is brutal, and the standard for an Apache seat is higher still. She made it on merit, all the way, every box checked, and by 2014, she had the wings and the rating and a reputation among the people who flew with her as the pilot you wanted in the seat when the weather went bad. Because of where she was from. Because of what her father taught her. Because Solveig Haarde, alone among most of the aviators in her unit, did not experience a whiteout as an emergency. She experienced it as Tuesday, as weather, as a condition with rules, and she knew the rules, and the rules did not frighten her, because you do not fear a thing whose grammar you learned in childhood. Which brings us to Norway. Northern Norway, above the Arctic Circle, in the deep of winter. A NATO exercise, a big multinational thing, the kind that gets run every so often to make sure that if the bad day ever comes in the high north, the various armies of the alliance can actually function together in cold that kills the unprepared in minutes. Americans, Norwegians, a scattering of others. Infantry working the high terrain, learning to survive and fight in country where the mountains come down to the sea and the daylight in winter is a rumor that lasts a few gray hours, and the weather can turn from clear to lethal faster than a man can find his gloves. Haarde's Apache detachment was attached to provide aviation support. Reconnaissance, overwatch, the things attack aviation does. And the whole thing was, for the first stretch, exactly what an exercise is supposed to be. Hard, cold, demanding, but rehearsed. Scripted. Everyone knew their part. The kind of dangerous that's managed. And then it stopped being an exercise. Here's what happened, and here's where I'm on solid ground because the men it happened to are the ones who told me. A platoon of infantry. I'll keep their nation to myself. It doesn't change the story, and they've asked me to. A platoon was working a high valley, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing when the weather came in faster than the forecast. This happens in those mountains. The forecast is a guess, and the mountains don't read it. What had been a marginal, flyable, workable winter day collapsed inside of an hour into the real thing. Genuine whiteout. The kind where a man holds his hand out and watches it disappear at the end of his own arm. And in the middle of that collapse, the terrain did what terrain does to men who can't see it. There was a fall. A bad one. A section of the platoon caught on a slope that gave way under the new snow, and when the snow and the noise and the scramble settled, they had 2 men down hard. Real injuries, not exercise injuries. One with a crushed and open leg, bleeding in a way that the cold both slowed and complicated, and one with what they feared was internal. Chest, abdomen, the kind of thing where a man looks at you with that particular gray calm and you understand the clock is short. And the platoon was now cut off. The weather had closed the valley. They could not move the casualties out on foot in that. Moving them meant killing them, and probably losing more men to the mountain in the process. They were pinned by the white, with 2 of their own dying, and the only way out for those 2 men was up, was air. The call went back, and the call landed, as these things do, on the people whose job it is to make the impossible decisions about whether other people get to fly into weather that wants to kill them. Which is how Solveig Haarde came to be standing in a warm, dry tent with a coffee urn in the corner, in front of a room full of pilots and planners, listening to Major Pruitt. I want to be careful and fair about Major Pruitt, because this is not the story you might think it is, and I will not cheapen it by making him a cartoon. Pruitt was the air mission commander. He was the man responsible, that night, for every aircraft and every aircrew in that detachment. And responsibility is a heavy and a serious thing, and a great deal of what Pruitt said in that tent was not stupidity and was not malice. It was the book. It was the hard-won, blood-bought wisdom of an entire profession that has learned, over and over, in funeral after funeral, that flying into zero-visibility icing conditions in mountainous terrain at night is one of the most reliable ways to turn one tragedy into 2. Pruitt was not a coward, and he was not a fool. Pruitt was a man doing his job by the rules, and the rules existed because the rules were usually right. He stood at the front of that tent, and he laid out the situation, the platoon, the casualties, the weather, and then he gave his assessment, and the people who were there remember it, and what he said was, whiteout conditions, people, 0-0, icing, terrain. Birds don't fly in this. We wait for the window. Birds don't fly in this. We wait for the window. And he was right. That's the part you have to swallow whole before you can understand any of the rest. Within the 4 walls of his profession, by the numbers, by every actuarial table that governs how the Army decides whether to risk aircrews, Major Pruitt was right. Birds don't fly in that. They die in that. The window, the break in the weather that the forecast said might open up in a few hours. The window was the responsible answer. The window was the answer that kept his aircrews alive. The window was the answer he could defend to a board of inquiry, to the families, to himself. There was just one problem with the window. The 2 men in the valley did not have a few hours. And Solveig Haarde, standing in the back of that warm, dry tent, holding a paper cup of coffee she had stopped drinking, was the one person in the room who knew it in her bones. Knew it the way you know the weight of a thing you've carried, because she was looking at the same weather everyone else was looking at and seeing something completely different. They were seeing a wall, a void, an absence of the conditions required to fly. She was seeing the prairie in January. She was seeing her father's voice. She was seeing weather with rules she had known since before she could drive. She was seeing a window that didn't need to open, because she had never needed the window in the first place. And what she did next, what she said, who she said it to, and what it cost her to be right in a room full of men who had every reason and every regulation on their side to tell her no. That's where this turns. That's the hinge. Let me take you to it. She set the coffee cup down. That's the first thing the people in that tent remember, the ones I could find. And it's a small thing, but it's the kind of small thing that tells you everything." She didn't slam it. She didn't make a point of it. She set the cup down on the edge of the planning table, quiet, deliberate, the way you set down a tool you're finished with because you're about to pick up a different one. And in a room where most of the noise was already moving on, Pruitt had said his piece. The decision felt made. People were starting to shift toward the practical business of waiting. That small, quiet motion of a coffee cup being set down was, for the people near her, the first sign that the decision was not actually made at all. "Sir," she said. Just that. One word. And Pruitt, to his credit. And I want to keep being fair to the man, because the fairness is the whole point. Pruitt didn't wave her off. He was a serious officer, and she was a known quantity, his best foul-weather pilot. And when his best foul-weather pilot says "sir" in that particular flat tone with a coffee cup just set down, a serious officer listens. He turned. "Hard. The window's not coming in time, sir. The forecast says." "I know what the forecast says, sir. I've read the same one you have." She wasn't loud. The people there are very clear about that. She was never loud. That was almost the unsettling part. A younger pilot would have gotten heated, gotten passionate, gotten emotional. And emotion in a planning tent is easy to dismiss. Emotion is the thing commanders are trained to filter out. Haarde gave him nothing to filter. She gave him numbers. The casualties don't have the window. The legs and arterial adjacent bleed slowed by cold. That buys time, but it doesn't buy hours. And if he's hypothermic, the cold that's slowing the bleed is also killing him. Those two clocks run opposite, and they cross somewhere we don't get to choose. The chest is worse. The chest is now. We don't have until the window. We have until they die, and that's sooner, and I think you know it's sooner, sir." A long quiet in the tent. And then Pruitt said the thing that the book required him to say, and it was not a cruel thing, and that's what made it so hard to fight. He said, "And if I send a crew into 00 icing in those mountains, hard, I might get the two of them and the crew. That's 4. That's an aircraft and a crew on a mountainside, and a recovery operation in the same weather that killed them, and more people dead trying to get the bodies. You know the math. You've sat through the same safety briefs I have. We don't trade a guaranteed crew for a chance at 2 casualties. That's not courage. That's how you turn one bad night into a catastrophe." And here's the thing. He was right again. By the math he was using, he was right again. The whole weight of the profession was behind him. Every dead aviator who ever flew into terrain he couldn't see was standing behind Major Pruitt nodding their heads. And Solveig Haarde knew it. And she did not flinch from it, because she had already done a different kind of math, and she laid it on the table now, flat, the way she did everything. "You're using the wrong number, sir." That stopped him. "You're calculating the risk of a crew that can't see in a whiteout," she said. "That's the right number for almost everybody in this tent. It's the right number for 95% of the aviators in this army. Because for 95% of the aviators in this army, a whiteout is a wall they've never learned to read, and sending them into it is sending a blind man into traffic, and you're right not to do it. But you're not sending a crew that can't see. You'd be sending me. A beat. I grew up in it, sir. I don't mean I've trained in it. I mean I grew up in it. Red River Valley. My father flew and farmed in country that does this 4 months a year. And he taught me to fly the way you teach a kid to swim in cold water. Early and for real, and with the understanding that the cold doesn't care about your feelings. I don't fly a whiteout on courage, sir. I'm not going to white-knuckle it and pray. I fly it the way you walk your own house in the dark. Instruments and terrain memory. Radar altimeter, attitude, heading, airspeed, and a map of that valley I will have memorized cold before I lift. I will never once look outside the canopy for information, because there's no information out there. There's just the lie. I'll fly the numbers and the map. And the numbers and the map don't go away when the snow comes. She wasn't asking him to be brave. That's what the people who were there keep coming back to. She wasn't appealing to his honor or the platoon's suffering or the romance of the rescue. She was, very calmly, telling a commander that he had loaded the wrong variable into his equation, that the thing he was treating as a near-certain death was, for this specific pilot, on this specific kind of terrain, a difficult but survivable proposition, and that he was about to let 2 men die based on a calculation that didn't apply to the asset he actually had. And the icing? Pruitt said, because the icing was real, and the icing didn't care where she grew up. Ice on the rotors changes the shape of the airfoil, kills the lift, brings the aircraft down regardless of how well the pilot can read the white. The icing was the one part of his objection that her childhood couldn't answer. Icing's a time problem, sir, not a no problem, she said. Low and fast and short. I stay in the warmer air near the surface. I keep the exposure brief. I'm down in the valley and back before accumulation's critical. It's not zero risk. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's zero risk, because then I'd be lying to you and you'd be right to ground me. It's real risk, managed. It's the difference between a risk and a guarantee. The window's a guarantee. Guaranteed those 2 men are dead before it opens. I'm a risk. I'm a hard, real, eyes-open risk. But I'm a risk that ends with 2 men alive. And I'm telling you, sir, I can fly it. I can fly it. Now, I want to stop here, just for a second, because there's a man I promised you I'd mention, and this is where he belongs. There was an old pilot Haarde had known early in her career, a senior warrant, near the end of a long road, who'd flown everywhere the Army had been ugly for 30 years. Reyes, and yes, that's the same family name as her gunner. It's a common name, and I've checked. They're not related. The world just rhymes sometimes. This older Reyes was out of Panama originally, came up through the Army the long, hard way. And he'd told young Haarde a thing once that she never forgot. He'd said, "Kid, the trick to a long career in this business is learning not to see what you saw. You see a thing on a bad night. You file it somewhere. You don't look at it again, because if you look at all of them, you can't fly anymore. That's how you last. You go a little blind on purpose." And Haarde had nodded, the way a young pilot nods at an old one, and she'd respected it, and she'd understood it was true. She'd watched it keep good men functional who'd otherwise have come apart. But somewhere in her, quiet, she'd decided it wasn't going to be her road. Because the old man's trick worked by not seeing, and Solveig Haarde's entire gift, the whole of her, was that she saw. She saw the weather for what it actually was when everyone else saw a wall. She saw the 2 clocks crossing on the wounded man. She saw the wrong variable in Pruitt's equation. Her whole life was built on refusing to go blind, on trusting exactly what was real and acting on it. And you cannot be that person and also be the person who learns not to see what she saw. The two don't fit in one body. So when she stood in that tent and said, "I can fly it," she was, without anyone in the room knowing it, choosing against the old man's survival trick. She was choosing to see all of it, the risk, the icing, the dying men, the regulation, the whole brutal arithmetic. See it clearly and act anyway. The opposite of going blind on purpose. And she'd pay for that choice the way you always pay for seeing clearly, which is that you don't get to put it down afterward. But that's the end of the story, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the tent. Pruitt looked at her for a long time. And I've thought a lot about what was happening in that man in that long moment, because it's the most interesting thing in the whole first half of this story, more interesting than the flight, almost. Here was an officer who was right. Right by the book, right by the math, right by every dead aviator standing behind him. And here was a warrant officer telling him, calmly, with numbers, that his rightness was built on a variable that didn't apply, and that his correct decision was going to kill 2 men who didn't have to die. And Pruitt had to decide, in that moment, whether he was the kind of commander who could tell the difference between a rule and the reason the rule exists. Because that's the whole job, in the end. Any clerk can apply a rule. A commander is the person who's supposed to know what the rule is for, and to know the rare, terrible moment when applying it correctly produces exactly the outcome it was written to prevent. He didn't give her permission. I want to be precise about that, because it matters to who he was. He didn't say, yes, go, Godspeed, you're cleared. What Pruitt did was harder and worse, and, I think, more honest. He said, I can't order you to fly that. Which was true. No commander on Earth could order a crew into those conditions. The regulations forbade it, and he'd have been hung for it. And I'm not going to, Pruitt said. I'm telling you, on the record, in front of these people, that my assessment is birds don't fly in this, and we wait for the window. That's my call, and I'm standing on it. And then he was quiet for a second, and then he said the thing that told you he was, underneath the regulation and the fear and the responsibility, a better man than the easy version of this story would let him be. He said, but I can't order you not to volunteer for a thing the regs leave to the pilot in command's judgment. I won't pretend I have that authority when I don't. So if you, as PIC, with full knowledge, elect to attempt this, that's on your authority, not mine. I'll log my objection. I'll log it loud, and then I'll get out of your way. And God help you. Hard, because I can't. That's not a yes. Read it again. That's a man drawing the exact line of his own authority and then telling the truth about where it ends. He couldn't send her, so he didn't. But he wouldn't lie about being able to stop her, either. He handed her the decision, naked, with his objection stapled to it, and stepped back and let her own it completely. People have asked me whether that was cowardice, whether Pruitt was covering himself, putting it on her so the dead crew would be her fault and not his. And I've turned it over and over, and I don't think so. I think it was the opposite. I think it was the most respect a commander can pay a subordinate, to tell her the truth, the whole truth, including the part where he thought she might die, and then to trust her judgment over his own fear without pretending the fear was a regulation. He could have ordered her to stand down by inventing an authority he didn't have, and most men would have, and it would have been the safe thing and the cowardly thing both. He didn't. He told the truth and let her choose. And Solveig Haarde picked up the coffee cup again. The people there remember this too. She picked it back up, drank what was left of it, cold by now, set it down a final time, and said, Understood, sir. Log your objection. I'm taking it. And she went to find her gunner. Her gunner's name was Reyes, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Miguel Reyes. And no, I'll say it again because the rhyme of it still gets people. No relation to the old man from Panama, though this younger Reyes had his own roots down that way. A grandmother from Cologne, a family that had crossed and recrossed that narrow piece of the world that the whole hemisphere squeezes through. Miguel Reyes had been Haarde's front seater for 2 years. In an Apache, the two crew members are not a pilot and a passenger. They're closer to two halves of one nervous system. The man in front runs the weapons, the targeting, the sensors. His helmet is wired so that the gun under the chin of the aircraft tracks wherever he turns his head, which means in the front seat your eyes are a weapon. The man or woman in back flies. And after 2 years, Haarde and Reyes had the thing that good crews get and can't explain to anyone who hasn't had it. They could fly long stretches barely talking, each one knowing what the other was about to do, a kind of marriage conducted entirely in clipped phrases over an intercom. She found him in the warm-up tent, and she told him straight, no softening, because softening it would have been an insult to a man like that. Pruitt logged a no-go. Birds don't fly in this. Wait for the window. He's right by the book. The platoon's got 2 dying who won't make the window. I told him I'd take it on my authority as PIC. His objection's on the record. This is a volunteer flight into zero-zero icing terrain at night, and the honest odds are bad, and I will not think 1 inch less of you if you tell me no. You've got a kid. I'm asking you to come fly the worst weather of your life into mountains we can't see, and I need to know right now, clean, yes or no, and either answer is the right answer. Reyes was quiet for a second, and then he said, and I have this from him, sitting across from me years later, a man who still could not quite explain why he said it the way he said it. He said, "You grew up in this?" "In it." "Yeah. You really think you can fly it? You're not talking yourself into it for those guys." And here's where Haarde's whole steady, terrible honesty did the thing it did. Because the easy answer, the inspiring answer, the answer that fits on a poster, would have been yes, absolutely, I've got this. And she didn't say that. She said, "I think I can fly it. I don't know I can fly it. Nobody knows they can fly something nobody's flown. I know I'm the best chance in this entire detachment of flying it and living. And I know it's a real chance and not a prayer, and I know the alternative for those two men is dying for sure while we drink coffee. That's everything I know. I'm not going to dress it up for you." And Reyes told me that was the thing that decided him. Not courage, not the platoon. He said if she'd told him she was sure, he'd have said no, because a pilot who's sure about a whiteout is a pilot who doesn't understand a whiteout, and you don't fly into mountains with someone whose confidence is bigger than the danger. It was the "I don't know" that made him trust her. The honesty was the safety. He said, "If you'd lied to me, I'd have grounded both of us. You didn't lie. Spin it up." So they went to work. And I want to walk you through this part slowly, the preparation, because this is where the real flying happened, not in the air, in the planning. And because it's the part that separates what Haarde did from a stunt. A stunt is brave and unprepared. What Haarde did was brave and prepared so thoroughly that the bravery almost became unnecessary, which is the only kind of brave that lives to tell about it. The map. She got the terrain mapping for that valley, and she did not just review it. She memorized it, the way her father had taught her about the land around the farm. Not as a picture, but as a body, a thing with shoulders and hollows and a spine. She walked the valley in her head, ridge by ridge. Here the ground rises to the left at this gradient. Here there's a saddle, a low point in the ridge, that's my way in. Here the floor of the valley runs roughly northeast at this elevation, and the platoon's reported position is here, in this widening, where the slope to the south backs off and gives a little flat. She built a three-dimensional map inside her skull, and she rehearsed flying it, eyes closed, in the warm tent, her hands moving slightly on imaginary controls while Reyes watched. Because she knew that the second the snow swallowed the canopy, the map in her head was the only terrain that would exist. The real mountains would be invisible. Only the remembered ones would be flyable. She set her instruments and she briefed them out loud to Reyes, every one, the way you brief a thing so that two brains hold it instead of one. Radar altimeter, the instrument that bounces a signal off the actual ground beneath you and tells you your real height above it, not your height above sea level, your height above the dirt that's rushing past. That was going to be her lifeline, the single most important number in the aircraft. And she set the low altitude warning, and she told Reyes that his job, among his jobs, was to call that number out loud any time it moved, because in the white she would be flying so close to the ground that a few feet was the whole margin between a rescue and a smoking hole. Attitude indicator, the artificial horizon, the instrument that tells you which way is up when your eyes have lost the argument. Heading, airspeed. She talked through what every needle would be doing in every phase, so that when the white came and her eyes started screaming their lies, she and Reyes would both already know what the truth was supposed to look like. And then she briefed the thing that was going to keep them off the rocks. And it was so simple and so disciplined that it's almost boring to describe. and the boring is the point. The plan was low and slow and known. She would fly a heading and an altitude she had pre-computed for every leg of the route in, each leg referenced to the terrain map in her head, and she would fly the numbers, not adjust to what she saw, because she'd see nothing, but fly the pre-planned numbers, leg by leg, checking each one against the radar altimeter and the clock, the way a submariner runs a plotted course blind under the ice. 60 knots, 50 feet, heading by heading. No improvising in the white. All the improvising done now, on the ground, in the warm, with a map and a clear head, so that in the air there'd be nothing left to do but execute a thing already decided. That's the whole secret. That's how you fly the impossible. You make it possible on the ground first, in a tent, with coffee, by being more disciplined and more honest and more thorough than anyone has any right to expect of a human being. And then you go up and you spend your courage not on figuring it out, but on holding your nerve while you execute a plan that's already complete. The bravery isn't the flying. The bravery is trusting the plan when every instinct and every sense is screaming. Then they spun it up. I want you to picture this, because it's its own kind of frightening before they even leave the ground. The Apache sits on the snow with its rotor turning, and the rotor wash kicks the loose powder up into a churning white cloud that wraps the whole aircraft, so that even sitting still on the ground they were already in a private whiteout of their own making, the world gone to milk before they'd moved an inch. Ice was the enemy from the first second. The crew chiefs had done what could be done, but in that air, in that cold, the moment the blades bit the wet snow-filled sky, they'd start picking up rhyme, and the clock she'd told Pruitt about started ticking the instant the rotor turned. Low and fast and short. Every minute in the air was a minute of accumulation. The flight had a built-in deadline made of ice, and she knew it, and Reyes knew it, and neither of them said it again because it had already been said, and saying it twice is just fear talking. She pulled in power. And here is a thing about lifting an aircraft into a wideout that the people who haven't done it cannot feel in their bones, and the people who have done it cannot ever forget. The moment you break ground, you lose the world. On a clear night you lift, and the horizon's there. The lights are there. The ground falls away beneath you, and your eyes confirm everything your hands are doing. In a wideout you pull power, and the snow your own rotors kicking up closes over the canopy, and suddenly, instantly, there is no outside. There is no down. There is no up. There is no reference anywhere in the entire visible universe except the green numbers in front of your face and your inner ear, which is now lying to you, telling you that you're tilting when you're level, that you're climbing when you're not, that you're turning when you're straight. A roaring chorus of physical sensation, all of it false, all of it deadly, and the only thing standing between you and a spiral into the ground is your absolute, trained, white-knuckled refusal to believe a single thing your own body is telling you. This is the moment that kills pilots. Right here, the takeoff into the white. More good aviators have died in the first 30 seconds of a whiteout departure than in any other phase, because this is where the eyes and the inner ear stage their mutiny against the instruments. And if you flinch, if for 1 second you trust the feeling over the gauge, the ground comes up and takes you. Hart did not flinch. Reyes said it was the calmest thing he ever felt in an aircraft and the most terrifying, both at once. She broke ground into total white, and her hands simply flew the numbers. Level the attitude indicator. Hold the heading. Bleed into forward flight. Gain translational lift. Ease the nose. Watch the radar altimeter come alive. He said her breathing didn't change. He said he was watching the gauges and watching her, back and forth, and the gauges said one thing, and his own terrified inner ear said the opposite and screamed that they were rolling, that they were about to die. and the only thing in that cockpit telling him the truth besides the instruments was Solveig Haarde's complete, eerie, prairie-bred calm. He said he stopped believing his body and started believing her. He said, "I flew that whole night on her nervous system instead of mine. Mine was useless. Hers was made for it." And down they went. Because the platoon was in the valley floor, and the valley floor was low, and the warmer air that would slow the icing was low, and the only way to fly terrain you've memorized is to be down in it where the contours mean something. So she didn't climb to safety. She descended into danger. Deliberately. By the plan. Down through the white toward ground she could not see, watching the radar altimeter unwind. 300 feet above the dirt, 200, 150. Reyes calling each 100 and then each 50 as they got low, his voice flatter and flatter the way a man's voice goes when he's pouring every ounce of himself into being a calm instrument for someone who needs him to be one. 100, 80, 70. 60, Reyes called, holding 60 knots. 60 feet, and then she eased it down to 50. 50 feet above invisible mountain ground, 60 knots forward, in a whiteout, at night, flying a map in her head leg by leg by leg. The snow a solid wall of moving white 6 inches past the glass. The green instruments the only real things in creation. Leg 1, she said. Heading's good. Coming up on the saddle. The saddle. The low point in the ridge that was her doorway into the valley. A gap in mountains she could not see, that she had to thread in the dark, in the white, by memory and numbers alone, with rock waiting on both sides close enough to touch if the white had let her see it. "Radolt's gonna bounce here," she said. "Ground rises through the saddle, then drops into the valley. Don't trust the bounce, trust the map. Call me the numbers, I'll fly the map." "Copy," Reyes said. Flying the map. And Solveig Haarde took a $35 million attack helicopter that was never built to save anyone, into a gap in the mountains she could only see with her eyes closed, toward 2 men bleeding into the snow who had no idea anyone was coming at all. The saddle. I've talked to enough aviators over the years to know that there are certain pieces of flying that even the people who do them for a living describe in a lowered voice. Threading a mountain saddle in zero visibility is one of them. Because a saddle is exactly the thing your whole life is built to avoid. It's a low place between 2 high places, which means it's a gap with stone shoulders on either side. And the entire trick is to put your aircraft through the gap without putting it into either shoulder. And on a clear day you do that with your eyes, easily, the way you walk through a doorway. In a whiteout you do it with a number and a memory and an act of faith, because the doorway is invisible and the walls are invisible, and the only thing you have is the certainty, the absolute pre-computed certainty, that if you hold this heading and this altitude for this many seconds, the gap will be where the map said it would be, and the walls will pass on either side of you close enough to spit on, and you will never, ever see them. "Coming up on the saddle," she said. "Heading 265, holding. Radolt's gonna climb as the ground rises." "Radolt's climbing," Reyes called, watching the number that told them how far they were above the dirt shrink as the dirt rose up underneath them toward the gap. 40 feet ground clearance. 38. 35. Now think about what that number means. As the terrain rose toward the saddle, the ground was coming up to meet them, and she was holding her altitude steady by the plan, which meant the gap between the aircraft's belly and the rock was closing, not because she was descending, but because the mountain was rising into her. 35 feet of clearance over rising stone, at 60 knots, blind. And every instinct said climb, climb, get away from the ground that's reaching up, and climbing would have put her into the white above the saddle, where the map meant nothing and the icing was worse, and she'd lose the contour reference that was keeping her alive. So she held it. 35 feet. She rode the rising ground through the gap like a hand sliding along a banister in a dark house. Close, trusting the wood to be where it had always been. 32, Reyes called, and his voice did the thing where it gets very even because the alternative is for it to break. 30, 30, holding 30. That's the top of the saddle, Haarde said. Ground's gonna fall away now. Radel will jump. Don't chase it. And it did. The map was right. The map was exactly right, because she had made it right on the ground in a warm tent with a clear head, and the ground fell away on the far side of the saddle into the valley, and the radar altimeter, which had been reading 30 feet of clearance, suddenly read 60, then 90, then 120 as the floor dropped out beneath them and the valley opened below the aircraft they could not see out of. A pilot who chased that number, who saw the clearance suddenly grow and reflexively descended to stay low, or who'd panicked at the 30 and was now overcorrecting. A pilot like that would have flown a porpoise through those mountains and eventually flown a porpoise into one of them. Haarde didn't chase it. She held her attitude, let the terrain do what the map said it would do, and let herself settle gently down into the valley on the planned profile. Leg 2, descending back toward 50 feet over the valley floor where the platoon was waiting. They were through. They were in the valley. And nobody on the ground knew it yet, because at 60 knots over a snow-deadened valley in a full whiteout, you can't hear an aircraft until it's nearly on top of you. And even then the sound comes from everywhere and nowhere, bounced and muffled by the snow and the rock. Now the problem changed shape, because getting into the valley was the flying problem, and Haarde had solved the flying problem the way she solved everything, with discipline and memory and an honest fear kept on a short leash. But now she had a finding problem, which is different. Somewhere in this valley, in a flattish widening where the southern slope backed off, was a platoon of infantry and 2 dying men. And she could not see them. She could not see anything. She had a reported position, a grid, a place on the map in her head, but a reported position in mountains in a storm is a guess wrapped in an estimate, and the platoon, when they'd called it in, had been doing their own kind of blind reckoning. She might be 100 meters off. In clear weather, 100 meters is nothing. You spot them in a heartbeat. In this, 100 meters was the difference between found and never. This is where Reyes earned his seat. Because the Apache, for all that it's a killing machine and not a rescue bird, carries one thing that turned out to matter more than anything that night. It sees in the dark and the murk with sensors that don't depend on a human eyeball. Forward-looking infrared, a thermal sight, a camera that doesn't see light at all, it sees heat. And heat cuts through the dark. Heat, to a degree, cuts through where the eye can't go. And in a valley of snow and cold rock, at near zero, the one thing that would glow on a thermal sight like a handful of embers thrown in the snow was the warm bodies of living men. Going to thermal, Reyes said, slaving the sight to search the floor. Bring me along the south slope, slow as you can hold it. And here's the brutal small irony of it, the thing that makes me shake my head every time. The infrared sight was degraded too. Snow in the air scatters thermal energy the way fog scatters light. A heavy enough snowfall blinds a thermal sensor almost as badly as it blinds an eye. So Reyes wasn't getting the clean, glowing picture the sight gives you on a cold, clear night. He was getting a fogged, scattered, snow-hashed mess, a gray storm on the screen, and somewhere in that storm he had to find the faint, warm smudges that were men. He hunched into the sight, and Haarde flew the slowest, most stable, most disciplined search pattern she could hold in those conditions. Back and forth across the valley floor where the map said the flat was 50 feet, slow, level, giving him the steadiest possible platform because a jittering aircraft makes a jittering sight, and a jittering sight finds nothing. 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 Snow's killing the picture. A long pause. the aircraft creeping through the white, the ice quietly building on the blades, the deadline ticking. Come right 10 degrees, take me across the widening again. She brought it right. And Reyes said, softly, the way you say a thing you don't quite believe yet, contact. Maybe. Cluster of warm. 11 o'clock low, 200 meters. Hold heading. She held it. It's them, he said, and now there was something in his voice. It's them. I've got a cluster. I can't count clean, but it's a group, it's organized, it's not animals, it's spaced like men in a position. And there's two warm sources lower, separate, prone. That's the casualties. Solveig. That's them. That's the platoon. 200 meters. You're tracking right for them. I want to let that sit for a second. 2 hours earlier, these men had been told, in effect, that nobody was coming. The window. Wait for the window. They were in a valley in the dark in a whiteout, doing the only thing you can do, which is keep the wounded as warm as you can and watch them and tell them lies about how it's going to be fine while the cold and the bleeding raced each other toward the same finish line. And they did not know, could not know, that out in the white, flying a machine built to kill them if they'd been enemies, was a North Dakota farm kid who'd looked at the same weather their commander had grounded everyone for and seen, instead of a wall, a doorway. She didn't land. I want to be clear, because people assume the Apache landed, and that's not what happened and couldn't have happened. There was nowhere to put it down safely in that, and no reason to, and the Apache carries no litter, no medic, no room. What she did instead was take up an overwatch. She set up a slow, stable orbit, and a stable orbit at 50 feet in a whiteout is its own miracle. A continuous controlled turn flown entirely on instruments with the terrain map running in her head the whole time, knowing where the slopes were on every part of the circle, and she held position over the platoon, a guardian angel they could hear now. Finally, the beat of the rotor coming down through the snow, and she got on the radio to the platoon and to the rear, and she said the words that those men have never forgotten and never will. She said, call sign and all, this is your overwatch. I have your position. You are not alone. MEDEVAC is inbound. Hold what you've got. You are not alone. To men who'd been told to wait for a window that wasn't coming. But here's the thing, and this is where the whole night turned on its hinge a second time, harder than the first. Hard was an Apache. She found them. She could guard them. She could mark them. She could orbit them till the ice took her or the fuel ran out. But she could not carry them out. The wounded needed a MEDEVAC bird, a Black Hawk, configured for casualties, with a medic and a hoist and litters and room. And the MEDEVAC bird had launched, because once Haarde found the platoon and confirmed it could be flown to, the calculus changed, and they sent the Black Hawk after her. But the MEDEVAC crew was not a North Dakota farm kid. The MEDEVAC crew was very good and very brave and completely, utterly blind. They got into the air. They got toward the valley. And then they ran into the same white wall that should have grounded everyone. And they could not find the saddle, could not thread the gap, could not navigate the terrain by memory because they had no memory of it. And they came up on the radio, and the voice of the MEDEVAC pilot was the voice of a good aviator at the absolute end of what he could do. And he said, we can't see the entry. We can't find the valley. We're going to have to turn back. We can't get in. We can't get in. 2 dying men, 200 meters below Haarde's orbit. A bird that could carry them out, somewhere off in the white, blind, turning for home because it couldn't find the door. And Solveig Haarde keyed her radio. And she said a thing that, the first time Reyes described it to me, I made him say twice, because I didn't think I'd heard it right, because it's not a thing that's in any manual and not a thing any sane pilot would propose. She said, negative. Do not turn back. I know this valley. I'm going to come to you, and you're going to fly my wake. Get behind me and follow my rotor wash through the snow. I'll be your lead. I'll be your eyes. I'll fly you in and I'll fly you out, and you will not lose me, because I am not going to let you lose me. Acknowledge. Fly my rotor wash. Let me tell you what that means, because it's the whole heart of this. A helicopter's rotor wash is the column of disturbed air and debris it throws down and behind itself, and in deep snow, that wash kicks up a churning, swirling, momentary trail of white, a disturbance in the storm, a wake like a boat leaves in water except made of snow and gone in seconds. What Haarde was proposing was to fly out of the valley to find the lost Black Hawk, get in front of it, and then lead it back in through the saddle and down into the valley so close, so precisely, that the MEDEVAC crew, who could see nothing of the mountains, nothing of the route, nothing of the door, could see the one thing in all that white that was knowable, the snow wake of the aircraft directly ahead of them. A lantern in a tunnel, a hand in the dark. She would not navigate for them by radio, which is too slow and too imprecise when the walls are 30 feet away. She would put her actual aircraft, with her actual body in it, directly in front of theirs, close enough that they could follow the disturbance she left in the air, and she would thread the saddle she'd already threaded once, leading a blind machine full of medics behind her by nothing but the trail she tore in the snow. 2 aircraft, in a whiteout, in formation, through a mountain gap, one of them flying the other one home like a guide dog leads the blind. It is, I'm told, one of the most dangerous things 2 helicopters can attempt, formation flight in zero visibility, because now you've got the terrain trying to kill you and a second aircraft right behind you that could fly up your tailpipe if the spacing goes wrong. And the trailing crew is flying on faith and a snow trail and nothing else. Everything that made Haarde's solo flight survivable, the freedom to fly her own profile, trust her own numbers, now had to be shared with a crew who couldn't see her except as a disturbance in the storm, and who would die if she lost them and would die if they lost her. The MEDEVAC pilot was quiet for a second on the radio, a good aviator, weighing a mad thing. And then he said, "Copy. We'll fly your wake. Don't lose us." "I won't," said Solveig Haarde. "Stay close. Stay glued. When I move, you move. I've got you." And she broke her orbit, and she went out into the white to find the lost bird and bring it home. Finding the Black Hawk in that white was its own small, impossible thing, and she did it the way she did everything, by knowing where she was. She flew back out toward the saddle on a reciprocal of the heading she'd come in on, climbing carefully back up the contour she'd ridden down, and she had the MEDEVAC crew call their position and their heading, and Reyes worked the radios and the relative geometry while she flew, and slowly, in the blind dark, 2 aircraft that could not see each other felt their way toward the same patch of invisible sky. "He's close," Reyes said. "By his calls, he's right out there, low and right. He's circling looking for the entry he can't find. Tell him to steady up on heading 265 and hold his altitude and do nothing else. Do not maneuver. I'm going to come up behind him and pass him on his left and slide out in front. Tell him when he sees my wake. That's me, fallen behind at 40, 50 meters, and do not lose it." And here's a thing about Solveig Haarde that comes through in this moment more than any other. She found him not by seeing him, but by trusting geometry, by holding her own perfect knowledge of where she was and where, by his calls, he had to be, and flying the closing solution on instruments and arithmetic the way you'd intercept a thing in pure math. And as she came up on his position, the snow in the air thinned just enough, for just a moment, that Reyes caught it on the thermal, the heat bloom of the Black Hawk's engines, a smudge of warm in the storm. And he said, "Got him." 10 o'clock, slightly low, and she eased over and up and slid her aircraft into the white ahead of the MEDEVAC bird, close, deliberate, and keyed the radio. "My wake's in front of you now. You see it." A pause. Then the MEDEVAC pilot, with something cracking open in his voice, I see it. I see your wash. I'm on it. Then here we go. Stay glued. We're going through the saddle. The ground's going to rise. I'm going to ride it down to 30 feet of clearance. You're going to do exactly what I do exactly when I do it. And on the far side, it drops into the valley, and we descend to the floor. Don't think about the mountains. You can't see them, and you don't need to. Just fly my wake. I've flown this gap once tonight already. It's exactly where I left it. And she led them in. I have tried, more than once, to find words big enough for what that flight was, and I've mostly given up because I think it resists words on purpose. It lives in a place language doesn't reach. 2 aircraft, nose to tail, through a gap in invisible mountains, in the dark, in a storm, the lead bird flown by a woman reading a map that existed only inside her own skull. The trailing bird flown by a man who had surrendered his eyes and his life to the snow trail in front of him. She rode the rising ground up to the saddle, 35 feet, 32, 30, holding it as steady as a hand on a rail, and she called every move before she made it. Ground's rising now, holding altitude, clearance coming down, steady, steady, top of the saddle. Now it falls away. We descend. Easy, easy, follow me down, so that the man behind her wasn't reacting to her wake a half-second late, but anticipating it, flying her words as much as her wash. And the Black Hawk stayed glued. 40 meters back in the white, the MEDEVAC crew flew through the eye of a needle they never saw, threaded between stone shoulders they never knew were there, because the woman in front of them said it's exactly where I left it, and they decided to believe her with their lives. And the ground fell away, and they came down into the valley, the 2 of them, lead and wing, down through the white to the floor where the platoon was waiting, and Reyes brought the thermal back onto the cluster of warm bodies, and Haarde brought both aircraft around in a slow descending arc and put the Black Hawk right on top of the casualties, talked it down, marked the spot. Your wounded are at your 12, 50 meters. I'm pulling off to your right to give you room. You're cleared to land. I've got the high ground covered. Get them and go. And she peeled her Apache up and away into a guarding orbit and let the rescue bird do the one thing it could do that she couldn't, which was land in that snow and open its doors. The platoon, down on the ground, heard 2 aircraft now where there should have been none. They saw the Black Hawk come down out of a sky that every law of weather said was closed, settle into the snow in a hurricane of its own white, and they got their 2 dying men aboard. The leg, the chest, both of them still in the fight. The cold that had been killing them, also the thing that had kept them alive long enough. And the medic got hands on them, and the doors closed, and the Black Hawk came up out of the valley floor. And it did not have to find the saddle on the way out, because Solveig Haarde was already there, out in front again, her wake torn fresh in the snow, leading them home. She flew them out the same way she'd flown them in, up the contour, through the gap, exactly where I left it, down the far side, the 2 aircraft threading back out of the mountains nose to tail, and then out, into airspace that was merely terrible instead of lethal, and then toward the field, and the ice on her blades had built and built the whole night, and she'd watched the performance degrade and flown it right to the edge of what the airframe had left and not 1 foot past, because she'd planned for the ice too, low and fast and short, and the short had held. They landed, and I'm told the thing that happened when they landed was nothing. No cheering, no crowd. The detachment didn't even fully know yet what had happened out there. The 2 aircraft came in out of the white, and the rotors spun down, and the snow settled, and Solveig Haarde sat in her seat for a moment in the sudden quiet with her hands still on controls that weren't moving anymore, and Reyes sat in front of her, and neither of them said anything for a while, because there are flights that you cannot talk about for a few minutes afterward. You can only sit inside the silence of having lived through them. And then, Reyes told me, She finally keyed the intercom one last time, and all she said was, "Good flying, Reyes." And he said, "Good flying, Chief." And that was it. That was the whole celebration. The two wounded men lived. I'll say it plainly because you've earned it, and so did they. The leg kept his leg. The chest, it was as bad as they'd feared, and it was a near thing, a very near thing. And there were surgeries and a long road. But he lived, and last I knew he was walking around somewhere being a grandfather, which is a thing that does not happen if Major Pruitt's window is the only plan and a North Dakota farm kid hadn't set down her coffee cup in a warm tent and said, "Sir." Now, Major Pruitt, I told you at the start I'd be fair to him, and I meant it. And here's where the fairness pays off, because Pruitt is the one who gave me the line that this whole story has been walking toward. After it was over, after the debrief, after the reports, after he'd logged exactly what he said he'd log, and stood on exactly what he said he'd stand on, Pruitt was asked, by someone trying to understand how it had been possible, how an Apache, a gunship, a thing built only to kill, had pulled off the most extraordinary rescue any of them had ever heard of. How a bird that carries no medic and no litter and no hoist had saved 2 lives in weather that grounded everything that flies. And Pruitt, who'd been right, remember, right by the book, right by the math, and had had the wisdom to know the difference between the rule and the reason for it, Pruitt said, "You're asking the wrong question. The aircraft didn't do anything. Aircraft don't do things. The Apache wasn't a rescue bird that night. She's not a bird. She's a pilot. And the pilot rescued them. The machine was just what she had with her. She's not a bird. She's a pilot." I keep coming back to that because it's the truest thing anybody said about that night. And because it cuts in 2 directions at once. It cuts at the easy version of this story, the one where the magic is the machine, the $35 million gunship and its thermal sights. No, the thermal sight was half-blind too. The aircraft was a tool, a good tool, and tools save no one by themselves. And it cuts toward the actual truth, which is that what saved those 2 men was not a capability and not a technology and not even courage, exactly. It was a specific human being who had been shaped by a specific place, flat country, killing winters, a father who taught her not to trust her eyes, into the one person in that entire detachment who could look at a closed sky and see a doorway, and who had then made that doorway real on the ground, in a tent, with a map and a discipline and an honesty so complete that by the time she flew, the impossible had been ground down into the merely terrifying. Major Pruitt's whole job had been to know the difference between a rule and a person, and in the end he did. He'd applied the rule correctly, and he'd stood on it, and he'd let the person be the exception, and he'd had the grace afterward to tell the truth about which one had saved the day. She's not a bird. She's a pilot. That's a man giving away the credit with both hands, and a man like that is rarer than the flight was. Solveig Haarde, last I checked, is teaching. That's where these stories so often land, and it lands there because it's where the people like her belong. She came off the line eventually, the way they all do, and she went where the steadiest ones go, which is into the seat next to the young ones, the students, the next crop of warrant officers learning to fly the worst weather of their lives. And I'm told, I can't prove this. It's the kind of thing that's true the way a legend is true. I'm told that there's a thing she says to her students, every class, when they get to the unit on flying degraded visibility, on instruments, on the Whiteout. I'm told she stands up at the front of a warm, dry room, and she tells them about her father, and the prairie, and the school bus that had a protocol for the white. And then she tells them the one thing he taught her that she's spent her whole life proving. Your eyes will lie to you. In the white, your eyes are your enemy. You will have your instruments, and you will have what you remember about the land. That's all you get. And here's what nobody tells you, she says. Here's the part that took me a whole career to understand. It's not just true in an aircraft. It's true everywhere. There will be days when everyone around you sees a wall, a closed sky, an impossible thing, a window that's never going to open, and they will all be looking out the canopy at the white, trusting their eyes, and their eyes will tell them it can't be done. And on those days, the only thing that will save you, and the only thing that will save the people counting on you, is whether you've done the work to trust something truer than what your eyes are screaming. The map you made when your head was clear. The numbers that don't go away when the snow comes. The thing you know in your bones from a place that made you. Fly that. Not the fear. Not the wall. Fly the thing you know is true. And then, I'm told, she always says the same last thing. And it's the thing I want to leave you with. Because it's hers and she earned it. And I couldn't write a better ending if I tried. Don't wait for the window. Sometimes the window isn't coming. Sometimes you're the window. I'm Hatch. Thanks for riding along. Fly the thing you know is true.